All right, some breaking news for you. A judge has released the Fulton County special grand jury's full report on interference into the 2020 election in Georgia. The jury heard from dozens of witnesses before recommending charges last December to District Attorney Fani Willis. Now, Nikole Killion's joining us now to explain kind of the report. It just got released, so everyone's trying to sort of dig in and get the key components of it. But before we even go down that road, I just want to clarify what this is, because there was a grand jury, but also a special grand jury. So tell us, the difference between the two and which report this is.
Well, just to be clear, this was actually a special purpose grand jury, which was more or less an investigative body. Obviously, as we know, shortly after that phone call that former President Trump had with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in January of 2021, where he asked him to find him the votes to potentially overturn the election in his favor. Shortly thereafter, District Attorney Fani Willis launched an investigation. And then in 2022, that is when this special purpose grand jury was impaneled. And so they heard from a variety of witnesses, upwards of 75 witnesses, ranging from, for instance, Rudy Giuliani and other top aides and associates of former President Trump, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, for example, along with a number of others. And so this special purpose grand jury was convened for a period of months where, again, they heard a lot of evidence in this case and ultimately produced a report at the end of that process, where we are now learning, based on the report that was released today, this final report, that they did recommend indictments against a number of individuals, some of whom were named in the recent indictment against the former president and those 19 co-defendants. So, for instance, they did, with respect to that call with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, they did recommend an indictment for the former president, for Rudy Giuliani. But there are also a few names in here that were not part of that indictment. For instance, Cleta Mitchell, who was another member of the former president's legal team. Again, we're still kind of going through this to see what other names might be in here. But that is really what is interesting about this report, because it kind of lets us know this is what the special purpose grand jury recommended to the district attorney with respect to indictments. Of course, now that she has indicted 19 individuals, we're now looking at this report to see whether the district attorney kind of followed that guidance and those recommendations that were made by this special purpose grand jury.
So, as we are telling everyone, this was just released. So you're kind of skimming it right now and giving us the highlights that are jumping out at you. One of our reporters, Graham Cates, also going through it and was, nice enough to kind of pull out some important bits for us. The grand jury overwhelmingly voted to recommend the indictment of Donald Trump, quote, with respect to the January 2nd or January, I think maybe 24th, I'm not sure. We're talking about the 2021 phone call from President Trump to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. So, we can remind viewers about that phone call, because that phone call really did seem like a smoking gun. I mean, he calls up the Secretary of State and says exactly how many votes he would like them to find.
Well, right. And obviously, as we pointed out earlier, this was really kind of what launched and spearheaded this investigation by the district attorney. And as I mentioned, they did, in fact, make this recommendation based on that specific phone call to indict the former president as well as others. But, some people do see that as a smoking gun. But, the former president and his team have argued that he did nothing wrong, that this was a perfect phone call in his view, and that he had a right to contest the election, and that's all that he was doing here. So, there is a difference of opinion here. Obviously, he was indicted in part not just for this call, but as we know, this investigation really was sprawling and went well beyond this call. This also involves, for instance, people like Rudy Giuliani, who testified before Georgia state officials, basically spewing out a lot of purported falsehoods about the election, that thousands of dead people voted in Georgia, that, ballots were illegally stuffed in suitcases and weren't properly counted. And so ultimately, again, we saw Giuliani and others indicted for purportedly making false statements to Georgia state officials. So not only was about this call, it was about pressuring other state officials. Also, this involves, a separate incident in a small rural county in Georgia where there was a breach of voting equipment in a small rural county called Coffee County. So again, all of this is part of this broader investigation, which again is part of this evidence that the special purpose grand jury heard, and again ultimately resulted in that indictment we saw last month of 19 individuals.
And so just to give people a sense of what we are hoping to find out as we continue to dig through this document is the kind of information that I just spoke about, how the members of the grand jury felt about the behavior. Are we talking about split decisions or overwhelming decisions in one way or another? And in this case, the grand jury overwhelmingly voted in favor of indicting Donald Trump. And Graham writes, 6 relevant statutes were cited, all with votes that included just one of up to 22 voters against. So basically, most people voted in favor. I think there's a couple of people who abstained. And some of the other people, so we have 19 co-defendants here, but there are questions as to whether or not the grand jury heard from other witnesses and recommended other people also face charges. I think one person in particular that we might be looking out to see if his name is on here is Lindsey Graham.
That's right. And obviously, again, still kind of going through it. But like I said, one name that jumped out to me was Cleta Mitchell, who was also a member of the former president's legal team. There are some other names in here as well. And that is significant because we know in the indictment that there were a number of co-conspirators who were unnamed in the indictment. So then that also begs the question as to why perhaps they weren't indicted, or whether the district attorney could move forward potentially with charges against additional individuals. Right now, that doesn't seem likely because obviously we know she has her hands full trying to set up a potential trial with 19 co-defendants who right now aren't all on the same page, but it does kind of beg the question why some were charged and others weren't.
I don't know if you actually know this, but how typical is it to have, we had a portion of this report released several months ago, and then now the rest of it now. Just how often does something like that happen? Are these reports typically released in their entirety? I don't know if you know kind of whether or not this is standard or not.
Well, part of why this wasn't released in full, portions of this report were released back in February after the special purpose grand jury was dissolved earlier this year. And so at the time, the district attorney argued that she didn't want the full report released because of concerns about due process for potential defendants. However, in this most recent order from Judge Robert McBurney, who ultimately is the one who ordered the release of this report, what he noted a couple of weeks ago is that clearly a lot has changed since this initial request was put forward back in February. And so now that this indictment has been publicly released, there really is no need to conceal the report anymore, more or less. So barring any objections, the judge made clear that he would release it today if there weren't any further concerns. And again, of course, now that the indictment is out, it pretty much validates much of what we saw released in the indictment last month.
And sort of the bit that we saw last month had to do with, or the report had to do with the grand jurors believing that witnesses lied under oath. Do we know have we gotten any additional information about that portion?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind, and I think the indictment kind of bears this out. Ultimately, this comes down to the former president and his associates lying about the election. And that is kind of part of why there was this entire indictment, right? Some of the charges against these individuals are for making false statements and purporting these election falsehoods that ultimately didn't bear out. And in the special purpose grand jury report, even the special purpose grand jury found no widespread evidence of fraud. And so that is why, to a certain extent, some of these grand jurors believed some of the witnesses may not have been truthful under oath. But again, just going through the indictment that was released last month, some 90 pages, it also outlined various incidences, some 161 overt acts where the district attorney alleges that the former president and his associates conspired to try to overturn the election results, in part by spreading falsehoods about the election that simply did not exist.
And so I know that we have our own CBS people kind of digging into it. I'm kind of reading reports of other media outlets digging into it. And what I'm seeing right here is that the special grand jury investigating the attempt to overturn Georgia's 2020 election did in fact recommend charges for several sort of former U.S. senators, but also we talked about South Carolina's current Senator Lindsey Graham. He had made a number of phone calls, it would appear, on the president's behalf. I think maybe you have better memory than me, but he didn't just call Georgia. He called Secretary of States in other places as well, right?
Well, he obviously, you remember, he attended a hearing, for instance, in Pennsylvania before legislators there. But in talking to some of the state legislators in Georgia, that really was critical in terms of some of the charges against Rudy Giuliani. Keep in mind, he appeared before a state Senate committee in early December of 2020. I talked to one of those state senators who was at that presentation. She was a Democrat who told me that, in essence, she felt that this was a very one-sided presentation and that, Rudy Giuliani and others who were making this presentation didn't really seem to have a good grasp of the Georgia elections process and how things work. And that, in her view, she felt that this was clearly a show and that it really, all of the claims that he and others were making didn't really hold much weight or water, that they simply weren't true. And then you have Giuliani, who then also appeared before a House committee in Georgia. I believe that one was virtually, but same thing, where again, he was alleging that there were dead people who voted. And also, keep in mind that election worker, Ruby Freeman, and her daughter, Shay Moss, alleging that they were involved in election fraud. And that ended up spinning off into a completely different, litigation and battle in terms of potential defamation there. And of course, we've now seen Giuliani kind of back down and suggest that, he shouldn't have said some of those things that he did with respect to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. So again, a lot of this stems from kind of what he told some of these Georgia state officials. That is why he's facing as many charges right now as the former president, 13 in all. Remember, this was a 41-count indictment. And so his role is very critical here, as are these other defendants.
And I should say that the report also appears to have recommended that two other former senators, GOP senators, also be charged. We're going to dig into that.
I think one of them being David Perdue.
You got it. David Perdue and I believe about Kelly Loeffler. So listen, we got to give you a break because you got to get back to your regular job there. Thank you so much for breaking in with us.